Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now. All right, check-ins. I'm a little bit physically exhausted. I just had an intense workout with Nick over Zoom this morning. Other than that, I always feel giggly when I talk with Bonnitta, so I'm in a very giggly state. Welcome to the Stoa. I am Peter Limberg, the steward of the Stoa, and the Stoa is a place for us to cohere in dialogue what matters most at the knife's edge. Today we have Bonnitta Roy. I don't think she needs any introduction in this space. She is the queen of sense making, my #1 crush. And we have a very, very interesting title today. I'm going to read it. Like when Bonnitta says she wants to do something, I'm like, okay, just do whatever you want, Bonnitta. And she said she wanted to do a talk on sacred cows, elephants in the room, and other noble beasts. And we both had like an editing error, and we just put, it was Nobel beasts for the longest time. So maybe there's some kind of unconscious Freudian slip there. Maybe we'll explore. That being said, I'm going to hand it over to Bonnitta. She's going to share her thoughts, and then we're going to have like a Q&A portion. So if you have any questions, just put them in the chat box. I'll call on you to unmute yourself, or if you want me to read on your behalf, let me know and I'll read on your behalf. This will be going on YouTube, so if you don't want to be on YouTube, you can ask me to read it for you. So that being said, Bonnitta, floor is yours. You're on mute. There you go.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming. Nice to see some new faces, some familiar faces, some blasts from the past. So yeah, getting a lot of energy just from seeing the room populated. Yeah, so the title, actually, Ann Kaspari is here with us today, and it's actually a title that we derived together years ago in one of our first workshops. And that is the sense of what are the elephants in the room? What are the monstrous stories that people are telling offline that never make it online or into your groups? What are the sacred cows? You know, something that I've been watching really closely on my Facebook page as I curate a lot of information around COVID, and also in the different venues I've been in, is there's implicit rules of where you can go in the information ecology. There's a lot of social sanctioning going on all the time, and so I'm not sure if people are sensitive to that. But even on these channels like the Stoa and Rebel Wisdom, and you see that there's invisible boundaries of where we're not allowed to think, right? So this is the notion of sacred cows or elephants in the room. And I think that if you've been in this kind of work long enough, you see there's kind of a rhythm where new intelligence will break through, new ideas will break through, and then they get kind of fashionable, become attractors, then they start to get popular on the media, and then they become somewhat of a performance kind of attractor, and the boundaries of what is talked about is contained and constrained, and like integral theory, and then there's a private language, and then there are penalties for going outside that private language in any group. And I think that as we experiment with new technologies, and a lot of us are spending time having more transparent conversation, I think it's really important that we also tune up our sensitivity toward when we are looking for cohesion, let's say, not coherence. So Peter will say the Stoa is a place where we cohere around dialogue, and coherence means that all the diverse opinions and all the perspectives make it into the information ecology, not cohesion, where we all kind of implicitly agree to these boundaries of beyond which we're not allowed to talk about. My current example or exemplar of someone who is very good at continually surfing those edges is Charles Eisenstein. I mean, Charles Eisenstein, if you watched him through his whole career, he started kind of like you thought. He was kind of a new age environmentalist, and they keep asking questions, keep vigilant that he's not sucked into some kind of popular fiction. Popular fiction is really, when we live in turbulent times, it's very, like our bodies are starving for popular fiction, for new mythology, for a new way to pretend. And I think that, a series on elephants in the room and sacred cows is probably, could be important in this ecology. So to start it off, I have some bullets I want to do, but I also would like to invite you all to throw out what you think is, is sanctioned out from the conversation. And we can address them as we go. But one of the things that I want to say is that anything that is understood broadly is poorly seen. So anything that can be captured by a broad generalization means that the people are not seeing the actual reality. You're not actually seeing what actually happens. So for example, the broad understanding of COVID-19 sanctions the anecdotal evidence, is what a lot of people are actually seeing. So one of the ways in which to address this conversation is, how can we coordinate broad understanding and preserve and perfect what is actually seen? And this is a real tightrope to walk. And it happens in very ordinary daily experience also. So I like to say it took me 30 years to know what a horse is, to actually see a horse. Because so much of the time when I was young, I participated with the Disney idea of the horse. And then when I was a competitive rider, I had this notion of the horse as excellence, a carrier of sports. And then when I got very sensitive about animal cruelty and learned about how they work with horses, constantly moving from one broad understanding to the other, and realizing that literally, even though I'd worked with them for 30 years and trained stallions, and once I started training stallions, it really started like understanding that all those years, I actually was not aware what was right in front of my face. And so this notion of anything that is understood broadly is seen poorly is something that I think we need to bring into the sense-making space. Because you get these people coming on and, this phrase, war on sense-making. And then all of a sudden people are like, we have a war on sense-making. It's very popular, right? So it's very broadly understood, but there's not a lot of actual participation in what is actually happening. There's not a lot of perceptual information coming in there. You have a lot of theories, you have a lot of psychological theories, and conspiracy theories, and you have all these things, but like, what does that actually mean? And I did this interesting poll on the meta-modern list when the war on sense-making got really big. So I asked people to rate their sense-making and their meaning-making from a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high. Sense-making we defined as being able to make a sense with other people in the public sphere, and meaning-making is, your own personal meaning. And it was like Lake Woebegone. Everybody rated their sense-making and meaning-making higher than average, right? So I'm like, okay, you guys are the prophets of the war on sense-making, and you rate your own experience as 6 to 7 to 8. Some people were like 9 and 10. So it was like, oh, look, we have a crisis in sense making. This is the profits of sense making. But the same people, when they reflect on their own experience, we're not rating them very low, with the exception of one or two. But in general, this was not the case. So there's like a lot of stuff going on all the time. And I think that we're very vulnerable to, we're at a crossroads, because the modern world, where there were sacred cows, there were generalized information that we all kind of assembled around. That world is kind of over. And so we're very vulnerable to whatever can capture our imagination and then go with that whole hog. So that's kind of what we want to talk about today, and see if we can get down into some particulars. Yeah, in this, if people are having the same kind of experience, and how are they themselves trying to negotiate that.
So I'll warm up Bonnitta with a few questions, but if you have any questions, just throw it in the chat box. So my first question is, how are you negotiating that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways. One is, and some of you took the couple of collective insight practice workouts. One is this notion of what I call still hunting. And we talked about still hunting social media. Like, you can let a lot of information in without trying to organize it into like some final answer, right? It's as if you're watching birds, and there's more cardinals over here, there's more this over there, there's all this stuff going on. It's not there for you to collect and adjudicate and create some kind of conclusion to it. That's not how collective intelligence works. Collective intelligence works like your brain does. Your brain has many, many sub-threshold micro states going on at the same time. Some of them say there's all kinds of things going on. There's maybe a 2% chance that this house is going to burn down, and that little thing is in there. And then there's a 40% chance that my dogs will start barking right now. So as I'm looking around, I can mine all these little kind of sub-thresholds, expectations and ideas that are in my awareness. They're not in my awareness, they're sub-threshold. And the end product is a threshold event that comes out of all of those. And our tendency on social media is to, that's anecdotal. Like, we have this notion that anecdotal information doesn't play in the arena of scientific information. We have this notion that the data crossed with a computer simulation is more real than anecdotal information. We have this notion that, it is true that bots create a lot of conspiracy theories, and the algorithms do what they do. That's also something that's very hard to suss out. But it's you take in the information and you notice. Like, you notice, for example, that the New England Journal of Science, the New England Journal of Medicine, I think, writes an article that says asymptomatic transmission, the notion of asymptomatic transmission was a false study, right? And then you notice two months later, there's another article that says that's a false study. But instead of shifting to like, oh my God, I believe this. Oh my God, I believe this. You realize that both of those are part of the information ecology. They're both partially truths. They're not maybe weighted the same way, but you need to let them in. You need to understand, not understand, you need to be in relationship with all the sub-threshold information. And then that changes your behavior. You may not be able to come up with some kind of like systemic download that adjudicates all that, but if that all that lives in your system, then you're primed positionally to move with how the information moves, right? And that you don't try to go for quick closure. So that's one way to work with the information ecology, is to understand that you want to be in relation with many, many sub-threshold, um, like microstates. Collective intelligence works across people, like in your brain. You want all this information to be part of your awareness and not struggle to create some kind of like final synthesis, because you're working with collective intelligence. It's not the same as collecting intelligence. What is your tolerance? For example, there's a term called your dispositional state. What is your tolerance for saying, oh, that's interesting? It doesn't prove this person wrong. It proves, that's interesting also. So how many information points can I be in relationship with without like this notion of trying to capture the truth, right? Trying to capture the truth. And what does that mean then in terms of like, well, then how do you know what you know? Well, maybe you don't know what you know, but it will change your behavior. It will modulate, for example, your fear. It will modulate, for example, your extreme behavior on one side of the polarization or the other. And that's kind of one skill, if you happen to be someone who is interested in this, in the collective intelligence, and you do a lot of, spend some time looking at that on social media. The other is to just really discipline yourself from social media itself and learn how to pay attention in your own local environment. You can learn a lot about how things work if you pay attention to your own internal environment and your participation, for example, in the natural environment. There's a huge amount of depth to perceive there.
So I got a question, and it might be a request for advice as well. So with the Stoa, which I'm viewing as a digital campfire, there's a wisdom gym that is really organically emerging. It's sort of like what John Reiki calls it, has ecology of practices. And we have about maybe around 10 right now of recurring events, and there's many more. I can picture there could be hundreds in the wisdom gym in the future. And it's really just, it's finding the Stoa rather than the Stoa is finding it, so to speak. And I'm just sort of listening to what I call the daemon in myself and others. And I'm just getting the fuck out of the way and just allowing people to give their gift, so to speak. And the move there is that once this stuff forms, I'm also an adjunct researcher at John's Consciousness and Wisdom Studies Lab. And so the idea is allow this collective intelligence to emerge in ecology of practices and do studies on it to see if it works. And I imagine there's a lot of like things in the middle there, right? So just any advice on that project, how to proceed, and maybe what to look out for, or what type of practices in order to get the skill set unlocked.
Yeah, I think you and I had touched on that a little bit when we first talked, and that is this notion of trying to stay away from programming, like controlling. A lot of these initiatives start with a lot of variation, but then the word also that is used, audience captured. You start to let the popularity create a narrative arc, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's what he's doing. There's like, he's self-reflective now, and he thinks the Stoa is this, and you can feel this design happening. And that's okay. I mean, if that's what you're doing, that's more traditional broadcast journalism, for example. To go to Fox for one thing and to go to this for that thing. And it's also going to naturally happen. You are going to at some point be a strange attractor that wobbles around a certain themes or sub-themes or whatever. So moving off out of that is kind of challenging. So that's one thing, but also understanding that, I mean, I'm just going to be very provocative here, right? So you see just that social sanctioning thing, but also understanding that when we are in this business, we are just part of also that collective intelligence. And if we look at what's happening, you know, in terms of the environmental crisis, the political crisis, financial crisis, there's a good chance that we are not, we meaning the people that you will attract are not the people who are going to fix it. There's a good chance that the Western world it's not our time. So this is an interesting conversation to have. What does it feel like to be in this game when you're like, yeah, this is not our time. This is not ours to fix. This is not the capacity. We don't have the capacity and the competency. We're not especially situated to fix it this time. So you start to realize that that itself is kind of malware, right? That's in us. That's like, oh yeah, you know, we're going to fix this. We got this. We got this world. If you look at it clearly, chances are we're not especially suited for it this time. So then the question becomes, again, in terms of trusting the whole. If we're not suited for that, then how do we allow ourselves, if you go down this rabbit hole and you start to really feel into that, and you say, we're not really suited for that, we're going to trust that marginalized cultures, marginalized people, Africa perhaps, you know, there's 13-year-old girls in Africa that have created engines that run on pee. If you watch Sugata Mitra's Hole in the Wall School, there are children who can't speak English, who've never been to school, and he puts a computer in their village and they learn about recombinant DNA because their social structure is intact. So they have all these ways of really harnessing collective intelligence. It's not clear that this is our competency right now. So if you entertain that as part of your understanding of what you're doing, I think that releases something. It opens a lot more opportunity. You know, I'm not saying you're going to go and take a camera and go into the hood in LA. That's not yours to do either. It's like, this is maybe not ours to do. So then what do we do? Maybe there's a leapfrog. What if we started to do things that were ideas on the other side of the transition? Maybe we could bring something then. So these are the kinds of opportunities for understanding the time that are much broader than you hear in your everyday podcast or on these channels. And so and I'm just throwing out a couple of them. I mean, these communities can practice, people that I spend a lot of time with. You know, there's a lot more of that kind of questioning going on. And I see a lot of people, you know, I'm not saying it's true, but I see a lot of people going, yeah, the notion that maybe Western people are not suited, that sits in your intuition as a very real possibility, right? There's something about it. I'm not downing us. I'm not, but the collective intelligence is like the whole kit and caboodle here. And so again, when we're on social media, when we're talking about the politics, and is that should live in this much larger appreciation for the human species. It could be the humans are not even, you know, it's not even humans' time. Well, we won't go into that, you know, it could be like Mother Earth is making a big move or something like that. But in terms of collective human intelligence, you know, all of these, if you really allow your mind to create a wider perspective, like what is really going on here, then you start to see there's a lot of space in the sense-making space. There's actually always a lot of space to perceive, and sense-making is about sensing. sensing and feeling and getting to know this person who, where's this conspiracy coming from? You know, what is the lived experience of that person, instead of, oh God, you know, don't put that up on Facebook, that's a conspiracy. Like the more we're triggered and vulnerable to jumping down the throat of all these information, the more we sanction things that actually has valuable information. Why does our information ecology have conspiracy theories? You know, Charles Eisenstein wrote I think he did a podcast, or no, wrote a long thing about it. So yeah, like don't just get sucked into the content, but it's sense into the rhythms and the dynamics of the broader collective intelligence.
Yeah, no, I love that. It resonates a lot. That's where sort of Fuller and I had tension with my performative agnostic piece, because I like exercising the muscle of understanding someone's reality tunnel in the propositional sense, so you can pass their ideological Turing test, but actually sink into the felt sense when they believe what they believe to be true and feel it. And that way you can kind of really communicate with them, and instead of just shaming them or judging them or whatever.
Yeah, and I had problems with on the internet with Bernie supporters, right? Because I mean, I've been called your pseudo neutral, whatever bullshit non-alliance thing. And it's not that I'm not aligned. It's not that at the end of the day, I'm gonna not support one person or the other or make a choice. It's just that I don't live inside this totalizing narrative. It's not healthy for anyone that I would vote for. It's just not healthy, right? So, yeah, it's like people are like, only read books that have red book covers. Don't read the blue book covers. It's kind of like that's silly, really. And yeah, so even as we try to open up these spaces, there's a sense in which we simultaneously close our audience's mind. And we need to understand the precariousness of that. You know, that's ethics for people who are doing broadcasting. So, yeah, so there's a kind of a phrase in the spiritual community that it's kind of a paradox for a teacher, because if you make an object for the discursive mind out of the teaching, then the lesson becomes the poison. So how can we turn more, and this is why I love your wisdom, Jim, it's more just pointing out instructions. You know, it's not these hold down. If I can give you a capacity to ask a question, then I don't really want to supply the answer, right? So something like that. So this feeling of something like that.
Yeah. So I'll pivot in the question to the questions. I don't know if you, before I do, I don't know if you saw that. I won't name his name, but he's a Bernie supporter in sort of, you know, our space. And he called you and I integral reactionaries. So that's our title, Bonnitta.
Yeah, no, it's a fair, I mean, you can see how if people don't get it, they would think you're just trying to surf like
right
not non-attachment or some kind of whatever. I get it. Yeah, I mean, I think it in that sense it's an understandable assessment.
Yeah, it's just interesting how, like, you and I are obviously not reactionaries, but just that title, you know, that weaponization of that title, and it sticks on you. And
yeah, don't stick on me.
Yeah. All right, it's unstickable, Bonnitta Roy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually flattered that someone that obsessed.
They're only human. So Rain, you have a question?
I do. My question is, where does dogmatism fit in? Are you describing dogmatism? And if not, what's the difference?
Yeah, so I think it is about dogmatism and ideology, but what I'm talking about are people that can spot dogmatism and ideology. There's always a more subtle level. This is the trick, right? It's you get snookered by yeah, it's like a performative contradiction. Sub-dogmatism. Well, I don't want to call it meta because it's actually like deeper, right? But it's about, first of all, noticing that language and discourse and relating conversationally will create this, right? It creates it, and then always trying to sense where that creation is, and be interested in it. And you know, dogmatism is okay. There's people that have strong opinions, but I don't, someone attacks them, I think it's kind of funny. I might play with them, or I understand myself as, well, whatever. I'm very parochial. I see the parochialness of my own strong opinions. Yeah, so, and I also experience my inability to encounter or inhabit the strong opinions of other people. I have to use them, you know, I have to use my decoder ring, and then I lose some signal there. So, yeah, so these are all pertain to conversational engagements, more than embodied engagements. There tends to be more, well, you could have a dogmatic body, like someone who's teaching some kind of martial arts or movement arts, and teaches more from a dogmatic kind of mind. But in general, when I'm talking, this is more like conversational, you know, like what we do on these podcasts and stuff. Yeah, strong opinions, loosely held, which is better than a loose opinion. Here's the postmodern, a loose opinion strongly held, right? Mm. So, and the ability to hold that strong opinion, because in a sense, you want it shattered. Like it's fun to see. It's like building sandcastles. You build them really, really well, because when the tide comes in and sucks them away, you giggle more, you know, like, or creating those sand mandalas, all the effort to make it as perfect as possible, because then when it's destroyed, you really, really have a lot to let go of.
John Davis, you had a question about magical thinking.
Hi, Bonnie.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Yeah, you look great.
Yeah, it's been a long time since Magellan courses.
Yeah.
We've come a long way.
Who could have predicted?
I've been following this series and have been really fascinated by it. I have a question about magical thinking, which a lot of people I've noticed in this community and other communities have expressed enormous contempt for. So I think that's something that I would like to address, because I identify with being a storyteller. I come from the gay movement, and in the other big pandemic, which was the AIDS epidemic in the gay community in the 80s, we had to think magically to survive. We had to create stories that were compelling. We had to create stories that could change stories that were being told. So I identify as a storyteller. And when I'm storytelling at my best, I'm a whistleblower. And blowing a whistle gets attention fast. It starts and finishes a game. It creates good boundaries. And I also want to blow the whistle mindfully so that I don't create false alarms. So we don't have often the circumstances that life creates for us, the conditions. do not, we have to use our imaginations in healthy ways rather than destructive ways. And I think this is something that you bring attention to with your emphasis upon going underneath the story to the energetics. But I also think it's important that we go beneath the story to the energetics and go back to another story that is compelling, that creates momentum, that grabs attention, that can move us towards something different and better than. There's no guarantee, by the way. This is extremely messy. But I think we need to be more friendly to the narrative and the meta-narrative capacities that we all share. And recognizing absolutely the sometimes pathological stories that we tell. So we want to tell stories that don't re-traumatize us. I think this is I think one of the things that is I share with you, I believe. So people do get trapped into stories that are pathological and crazy making and just and impoverish them. So thank you for this opportunity to rehearse.
No, it's good. Okay, so my answer is going to seem kind of odd to some people who don't know me, but I feel called because you asked me to go there. So in my course, I teach something that it's toward the end of the 2 years called Magique Réalité. Magique Réalité. It's a trans-rational form of magical thinking, right? So that's why, and it has a K, and talk about it as French. So, I mean, you obviously, if you can name magical thinking in this context, you're more doing Magique Réalité. A brief, very brief description of it is that if you think of a matrix, up here you have what is specifiable, down here you have what is not specifiable. And here you have what is true, and over here you have what is real. So these are kind of, they're not polar opposites, it's just a landscape, let's say. So what's specifiable and true are things like theories, but they're true, not real, right? What is specifiable and real are certain types of stories, but they're not true. And then down here you have what is not specifiable and true. And over here you have, that's more like perception. And over here you have what's real and not specifiable. And that gets into things like alethic truth and stuff like that. So this is a way to really understand or to label. It's just a matrix so we can have placeholders for talking about this. I think territory that you're surfing called, and we call it Magique Réalité. And you get comfortable being able to understand those are all parts of your experience. And what's interesting is they're parts of, it's not a developmental lens, because children early on have all those 4 areas also. Something more, we hold it more like ontologically, you know, if you want to smell of it. So that's the deep response. In terms of stories, I think this is my opinion. I've read some of your fantastic posts, and I think you would agree that there are stories that we would say have narrative arcs. And then there are stories that say our experiences. And the closer we are to the particular, the more universal is the message. And I know some of your journal writings on your experience, I think not in nursing homes, but with hospice or something close to that, always come with this kind of universal, but you're just saying what your experience is. So you could call those, you could call that a story, but this is a certain kind of story. It doesn't have a narrative arc. You're very good at, for example, there's so much beauty, usually around 2/3, when you used to write, 2/3 down into your story, there's so much beauty. And as a reader, you would think you're thinking it's going to have this conclusion and they all went out into the sunset, and you never deliver that because that would be inauthentic to your experience. So I'll always remember that tension that's more real, right, than true. It doesn't tell a story that way. So just happy to reflect that back to you, and nice to see you again.
Cool. Phil, you had a question.
Oh man, can you hear me? Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like this probably opinions loosely held. And I think I want to take one step above that in terms of like at perception level. Like I'm afraid right now that like I am reading a whole bunch of stuff and I'm discounting a whole bunch of other stuff on the personal level. And then like, for example, everyone here on this at the STOA is all like really listening to like certain amount of thinkers, and we're kind of getting really, really deep into a few people. And I'm trying to think about like how important is like diversity. How do we make sure that we have a diverse like sense making, I guess, so that we can actually create these types of understanding that includes a lot more diversity, and specifically also like how do you make sure that you're not just listening to the people with the loudest voice in terms of your sense making?
Yeah, I think because you've noticed that about yourself, you're probably in good shape. I mean, taking a deep dive is good. You start to see, now there's something actually encouraging about the podcast space, because other than Joe Rogan, I have to give it to him, a lot of these podcast spaces seem to have a half-life that turns quite quickly. Like the IDW got really boring really fast, So Rubin report got, so one of the things that's good is that we tend to binge and then something's lost. So I've noticed that. You probably have noticed it too, and so that's a good thing. There's so many people like really exotic characters like ContraPoints or Soph that I just went like, wow, I have to watch all of this. But then there's some need, and then there's something that it gets exhausted. It's, you move on. So that's really, that's encouraging, right? I think there's something working there. In terms of reading, one of the best ways to, and it's hateful. John is a really good writer, but one of the hardest things for me is when I used to read a lot. Then I got so, I'm a really, really fast reader. It's ridiculous how many books I have. But then I got to where I started writing for Integral Review, and then my master's and these other academic journals. This will send you where you need to read next if you try to write. Because when you're trying to write, you're like, really? There comes to a point where you're trying to get from this thought to that thought, and you realize there's this gap. Because when we hear people talk really fast, and they're very good articulating, like the things Schmattenberger can say. I mean, the stuff he's covering, and it just seems like, wow, it's really solid. If you sat down and tried to write just between this sentence and the next, that seems so logically one follows the other, you'll realize there's a huge gap there and that you really don't know anything, right? So now I think Schmattenberger knows, if you had a conversation with him, he could parse all those things. That's not what I'm saying. But you yourself will realize that you had a conversation, the whole thing seems really tidy, but if you try to write, and then you start to look, like the fact that I write now makes me look, moves me to like the things that I need to read next. And they come from different places because they show what I haven't, they're holes in my thinking. And it will show areas that I haven't visited
one thing I think you'd like, Bonita, sort of what I'm seeing with the Stoa. So Raven and I and a few other people, we're getting a lot of people in the Stoa from all across the political spectrum. And they're coming in sort of like doing these Q&As as sense maker nodes. But I imagine like the bait and switch is going to happen eventually, especially if the wisdom gym gets more robust and the questioning and the coherence and whatnot, is that it might seem like a sermon at first, but it might be a reverse sermon eventually, especially if the questions are really tight.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why we're doing this also, is to give people permission to bite, you know, like, yeah, give your dogs permission to bite. You know, the dogs go, you take your dogs to the dog park, and then the fight breaks out over there. They don't like go, what do? They all run. They all want to get into the fight, you know? And so we have this notion of transparent communication. We you know, rule omega, yes, but we need also permission to bite.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Someone just put noble beasts in the chat box.
Yeah, see, we got a lot, noble beasts bite. No, no, the noble beasts don't bite.
No, too noble. Tyson, I'm going to tag you in. I think you have a statement or a question.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, as Phil, with your question and Bonita, your response, it just was bringing up for me. Sometimes in these conversations, when I feel that I'm having insights and it feels really generative and I'm excited, I find myself like feeling sympathetic to those that identify as light workers, or like shamans of indigenous tribes, or people that claim to channel aliens, or like experiences I've had with young children that I've like freestyled and made music with, and they're saying these ideas that it is beyond explanation where they would have got them, and their parents are like, I don't know. And so there's like this, I guess, this part of me that's sympathetic and has this appreciation and identifies with the magician and magical thinking. And at times I find myself with this curiosity of how to, and I think it's about bridging the worlds within me of like my, the magical imaginary side, and then the very critical intellectual side. And I find myself, just like wanting to sort of bridge these tribes more effectively. And I just even just for the joy of seeing more of these conversations happen and seeing them go back and forth. So that's just something that was coming up for me.
Yeah, so it reminds me of, and John, you're going to get a laugh out of this. So when I first started teaching the master's course in consciousness studies, you know, I had an allergy. Well, the course has changed a lot. Like I get a lot more people like who that's on this thing. And at the time, the school had attracted a lot of women who's, you know, recently divorced women whose children were grown up, were taking a lot of yoga and at Kripalu and Omega and this stuff, and kind of new age, light new age thinking. You know, when I do my work, it can be very academic. It took me a long time to get a degree because I don't like academics themselves. But, and so I had an allergy to a lot of new age thinking, you know. And, but then something happened and the quality of person was changing. Like, and I noticed that now I was on the other side, that I was actually not letting in some, you know, people come to the course, they don't have a lot of language, you know, mostly I help them get language for making these distinctions. So, and we still get some people who need to be disabused of their faulty thinking or loose, you know, sloppy thinking. But something started to switch, and it started to switch because, again, the kind of irritation I had was different. Like I was overreacting. It was like really bothering me. And so I pay attention because like, why all of a sudden am I really bothered? It was because I had to really examine that. It's like something's changed. And what was changed was actually an opportunity to notice that what was they're trying to communicate wasn't what I was thinking. That's where actually the magic reality came in. It came in my imagination during this 2 years where I'm like, what is going on? And then when I put it up, people completely could surf the notion that a theory was true but not real. And I thought, oh my God, these people have cognitive skills that developmental stage theory says they don't. They're just not articulate, you know? So it's all about noticing what's in the child, noticing a different way. And then being the you know, and bridging that into a wisdom skill, because the child can't then, you know, notice themselves. And then you start to see, oh my God. And I started to realize that the role of the teacher in this kind of space is only to listen and notice when something brilliant is trying, and then reflect that back. That's all. So that's all I'm actually, and then the rest is just blah, blah, blah. I have to do content and we have fun. Oh, and people will say, there's a couple of students of mine here, and they can confirm this. Sometimes people will be trying to work something out and they'll say something and they'll just keep going. I'm like, no, what did you just say? Just like you said with the kids. That's a brilliant insight. And we just stop and say, what you just said? Just slow down. Like, that is a huge insight. Let's spend some time with that. So you start to, I call it Tai Chi with words. You start to see all these gifts start percolating. Once the cohort gets tight, then it's really amazing. But yeah, I think that's what you're saying. Like read and all this stuff, but then notice what to notice. And when you start to notice, whoa, right? That's a big part that never makes it into the information ecology. It's the opposite. It's not broadly understood, but it's precisely seen, right? So that's beautiful. Thank you.
Great. So this would probably be our last question. Maybe Gray, you had a question.
Yeah, one of the things that I think creates a lot of like murkiness in the information ecology is our broad understanding of emotionality as like these things that we're kind of passively surrendering to, that are triggered by circumstances, and we have to defend that they are reasonably and justifiably triggered by those circumstances. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of broad understanding and all of that more precise stuff that it glosses over creates a lot of the identitarian issues that we run into with like creating better mimetic spaces. So I just wondered if you could talk to like what kind of group norms we could set to like bring that mirror energy into spaces so that we can start to understand our emotions better and like see them as like opportunities to communicate with ourselves instead of things we're helplessly like circumstantially suffering.
Yeah, it's a very good question. We talked about this last Monday. I think it was last Monday on the playground. Again, it's about making distinctions. So an emotion is a bodily sensation plus a story. So what you want to do is lose the story and process the lived experience of the body. It's really hard because then you start to realize like you actually want the drama and the story. So then you have to come to terms with that, right? Now, there's a fun way to get around that because, you know, sometimes you're in like a bar, you're in a social situation, and you realize you're actually playing with the drama and the story. It's things we like to do. But if it's a crucial moment in your suffering, you'll still see that you're actually attached to the story that makes you suffer too. Like, and then you start to say, what is it about the story? Or maybe you're addicted to the way your body feels or something. And you start to realize the micro states of how the story is attached and becomes an emotion. And so the more you can work with it at just like what your body's doing, and affects, which are, you know, what your body's doing, they're like everything else. They come and go and they take the time they take. And so while they're here, they need to be honored. But, you know, and when they're gone, you know, they need to be released. And yeah, so just try to be, and we talked about it. You might check out the video because we talked about how there's like care, is an expanded form of relationship, and the contracted form is panic, when you're afraid to lose what you care for. And you start to see your energy signature will toggle between care and panic, play and anger, and seeking, curiosity and fear. And you start to see really that other than lust, which we want to get to next time, that's all you're really working with. And everything else is because we like the story. We like to play the story. It's a good thing, it's a bad thing, it is what it is. That's a good question. Thank you.
Very cool. So that brings us almost to the hour. Bonnitta, do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
No, I mean, these were all really good questions. It's there's a lot more that obviously I'm sure people are holding on a lot more that we could dive into. But I really like the question, and I think that, to have more of these kind of conversations was really, really great.
And so what's happening with the playground on Friday? Or is it ongoing? Are we going to end it? Or
Well, people want to talk about lust. So as the seventh affect, we might start there. Then there's other things we could look at. I don't know. I make it up, as we go along. So we'll probably talk about lust. What's the role of lust?
cool.
I'll have to get my old journals out. Study up. Oh yeah, that's what it was like.
Yes, I think that's a juicy topic. So week by week, lust. Bonnitta's playground, that's Fridays at 10 a.m. Eastern time, I think. Yes. So Bonnitta, thanks so much. Maybe I'm happy to have this sort of a semi-regular series too, if you want to come and share your thoughts at the edge of your thinking in front of the group. I think
Maybe like once a month or something.
Yeah, that'd be really, really great. So for next events, we have a bunch. One Nation and All Win Leadership from the kind of One Nation Party, Christopher Light. He's coming tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And then the same day, Benjamin Boyce is talking about gender transition and discourse. And that's at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So RSVP to those and check out our Wisdom Gym. That being said, just go to the website, sign up for the mailing list. You can check out the gift economy, and just keep being awesome and beautiful.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Peter.
everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.